Hello, this is Priscilla Rice, and I'm coming to you from Live Oak Recording Studio. This week, we're going to have a rebroadcast of one of our earlier classic podcasts. We hope you enjoy it, and thanks so much for listening. Episode number 654, The Butterfly Effect.
You're listening to the official BNI podcast with BNI founder and Chief Visionary Officer, Dr. Ivan Misner. Stay tuned for networking and referral marketing tips from the man who's been called the father of modern networking, along with suggestions and insights into getting the most from your membership in the world's largest networking organization, BNI.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the official BNI podcast. I'm Priscilla Rice, and I'm coming to you from Live Oak Recording Studio in Berkeley, California, and I'm joined on the phone today by the founder and the Chief Visionary Officer of BNI, Dr. Ivan Misner. Hello, Ivan. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic, Priscilla, and I'm going to share with the audience here that we just spent 5 or 10 minutes looking on the podcast to see if I've talked about a subject that I have done speeches on for years, but we could not find it, and that's the butterfly effect of networking. Now, I've made reference to it in a couple of podcasts, but I've never shared the story, apparently. When you do, we've got over 600 podcasts that we've done, and when you do that many, sometimes you don't realize some of your long-standing stories don't get out as a podcast. And this is such a great concept that I want to do a podcast on it.
Okay, great. Tell us about it.
Well, it's a story on how I came up with the concept. And I was thinking about this because I had just a month or so ago, I just spent a week in the Caribbean on an island called Necker Island. And it made me think of the first time I was there and came up with this concept of the butterfly effect. So I'm going to share it with you here. And this was 2007. I'm on this island in the Caribbean in the Great Room, a huge room, and it had literally, Priscilla, a 300-degree view of the Caribbean.
Oh, wow.
Just a little bit behind us that I couldn't see. Otherwise, I was able to see the entire Caribbean. It was just so beautiful. And I had a deadline to write an article for Entrepreneur. At the time, my blog, ivanmisner.com, was housed at entrepreneur.com. And I had a deadline, and this was about September 24th, I think I did the article, to this blog. And I was stuck. I had nothing. I don't know if you write, but sometimes when you write, you're completely dry. And I couldn't think of a single thing to write, and I had a deadline to get that out. And so I'm sitting there completely clueless as to what I'm going to write about. And while I'm sitting there, up walks Sir Richard Branson, who owns Necker Island. And if you may or may not recognize the name, he's the founder of Virgin Atlantic, Virgin Hotels, Virgin Cruise Ships, Virgin Galactic, Virgin everything. And he walked by, Priscilla, and he looked at me and he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, at the time in 2007, it was the only place you could get internet on the island. I said, well, I had to come here to write an article and upload it. I've got a deadline today. And he said, oh, well, I understand deadlines, but look, we're down by the pool in the ocean. We're having a blast. Come on down and join us. And if for some reason I don't see you, make sure to sit next to me at dinner tonight. And I'd like to learn more about this networking thing you do. And I said, sure. And he walked off. And Priscilla, I sat there and I thought, I really thought, dang, how did I get here? What brought me to this moment in my life where I'm sitting on an island in the Caribbean and a billionaire walks by and says, hey, what are you doing? Come on out and play. Come join us. We're having fun. And if I don't see you, sit next to me in the lunchroom. I want to talk. I want to get to know what you do more. And I sat there and I thought, how did this happen? How did I get here at this moment? And so what I did, as I was sitting there, is I reverse engineered how I got there. Who was it that invited me to spend a week on the island For the first place, it was a special seminar that I was invited to. And who was it that invited me? And how did I meet them? And where did I meet them? And how did I get invited to the place that I met them, which was actually the Transformational Leadership Council? I met the person who invited me to Necker from the Transformational Leadership Council, which I've talked about many times on my podcast. It's an organization started by Jack Canfield that meets twice a year and has transformational leaders and thought leaders. And it was somebody that was in there that invited me. And I thought, well, how did I get invited to TLC? Well, that came from Jack Canfield. He invited me. So how did I meet Jack? And so I reverse engineered it, Priscilla.
Uh-huh.
And it went back 2.5 years.
Uh-huh.
So this is 2007. It was somebody I met in 2004
Uh-huh.
who asked me for a favor. And the person who asked me for a favor was a BNI member. And she was a solopreneur business coach. And she asked me for a favor. And it was, we all get asked favors, and sometimes they're really on mission for you and they're part of what you do, and sometimes they're not. Well, this was something I really wanted to do. She wanted me to do some training material for this coaching company. And so I said, sure, I'll do it. There was no money up front as possible down the road. But I said, yes, okay. I did it. And that led to being hired to speak for that organization, which led to me meeting Jack, which led to me meeting several people in TLC, one of which led me to meet, to be introduced to someone who knew about the seminar on Necker that then got me onto Necker Island. And that whole process took 2.5 years.
Uh-huh.
And when I reverse engineered it, I realized that this is a great example of a concept called the butterfly effect. And the butterfly effect is a concept in mathematics called chaos theory. And chaos theory is explained through the flapping of the wings of a butterfly. That something as simple as the flapping of the wings of a butterfly in a tropical area makes some minute change in the environment, which changes something else, which changes something else, which changes something else, which changes the weather. And it hit me that what I had just experienced was the butterfly effect of networking. And that is that a simple conversation with a solopreneur business coach led me to meet somebody, which 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 led me to spend a week on Necker Island and get to know Richard Branson. And having spent just another week as my third visit there, recently this story came back to mind, and that became my article that day. And you can find the original article on my blog now at ivanmeisner.com. If you go back to September 24th, 2007, you can see the original article that I wrote. And I'll make sure there's a link here in the podcast. But here's the relevance to anyone listening to this podcast. You never know who someone knows and who they can introduce you to. Who is it that they can introduce you to? Now, that person may not be a Richard Branson, but they'll know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And if you keep following those connections, it's like the ripple effect by dropping a pebble in the water. You drop that pebble, and there's a ripple that goes out. And that ripple connects you with somebody else, who connects you with somebody else, who connects you with somebody else. And so I know that I mentioned the butterfly effect of networking, at least I'm pretty sure I did in the podcast called Networking Up, that I did here on the BNI podcast. And that is part of the Networking Up, because when you're networking peer-to-peer, or you're networking with somebody who's maybe not as successful with you, all too often we kind of think, well, that person doesn't have any contacts that will help me. Why would I connect with them? Well, the truth is they know people who know people who know people. And this one simple introduction led to multiple relationships a lot of very strong friendships, including Jack, who was just on our podcast a few months ago. I met him as a result of this. And it's led to several visits on Necker, and had an opportunity to spend a fair amount of time with Branson. And I know I've talked about him and humility. He's a very humble person. It's really quite amazing. And in one of our upcoming podcasts, I plan on talking about how he is at networking and how he is as a person and how we can all learn from that, because oftentimes I have found really successful people can be very arrogant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Their ego enters the room before they do. And his does not. And I've been very impressed with that. And so I plan on in a future podcast talking about how someone could become a billionaire and not be totally arrogant. And what I see as some of the characteristics of that. And I'll tell you what, I'll include a photograph that maybe we can put up in the podcast of Richard and my wife and I on the very first visit there. He invited us to a new island that he just bought, Mosquito Island, not like the insect, but with a K instead of a Q, Mosquito Island. And he just bought that island, and he invited us for a little tour of the island, which was really quite amazing. I'll include a photograph of that. But the butterfly effect of networking is very powerful. So find people. Here's the secret: is look for people who are good at what they do.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Whether you're networking down, peer-to-peer, or networking up, look for people who are good at what they do. Make a connection, and then follow that connection through the process. It can lead to amazing places. And by the way, when you find yourself in one of those experiences where you go, this is what Ivan talked about, I'm experiencing the butterfly effect, it's really important to pick up the phone and call the person that started the flapping of the wings of that effect. In my case, it was a woman named Kim, who was a BNI member, solopreneur business coach. So 2.5 years later, after I had worked with her, I called her up, and she said, Ivan, wow, what a surprise. It's great to hear from you. I said, Kim, I was just calling you to thank you for introducing me to Richard Branson. And I'll never forget, she was like, hello, Ivan? This is Kim. I don't know Richard. I said, well, let me tell you a story. And I told her the story about how my meeting her led for me to be on Necker Island. And so the last thing I want to leave you with is, if that happens to you, pick up the phone and call the person that started the process of your own personal butterfly effect. And that's the podcast for today, Priscilla.
I think that's great. I just have one little thing to say, which is you might want to trace the butterfly effect of meeting Richard and the way that it had on you. After you met him, what were the changes?
You know what? That's a great question. And when I do the next podcast where I talk about some of his characteristics that I think are really healthy characteristics for any business person, I'll add that in there.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting.
Because he did absolutely had an impact. I thought I was pretty good at something, but observing him, I thought, oh yeah, I could be better at that. And it had to do with networking. And so I'll share that on the next podcast I do about Richard in a few weeks.
Okay, great. I look forward to it.
Thanks, Priscilla.
Okay, well, that was some wonderful information. I just want to let you all know that the sponsor for this podcast is Ivan's Inner Circle. Go check out the great content available at www.ivansinnercircle.com. Ivan has assembled a variety of interesting topics for you to learn about and participate in. Thank you so much for listening. This is Priscilla Rice, and we look forward to having you join us again next week for another exciting episode of the official BNI podcast.